The first thing my mother-in-law ever said to me was, "So, what exactly do you do?" Not nice to meet you. Not my son talks so highly about you. Just a question carefully designed to measure my worth before she even learned who I was. I should have recognized the warning immediately. But when you love someone deeply, you convince yourself their family will eventually love you too. That was my first mistake. I met Evelyn Crawford 3 years ago at an engagement dinner held inside one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Crystal chandeliers, piano music, waiters who looked terrified to spill water near rich people. And Evelyn fit perfectly into that world. Elegant pearls around her neck, designer handbag resting beside her chair, the kind of woman who smiled without warmth and judged people before dessert arrived. Beside her sat my fiancé, Daniel, nervously adjusting his tie while trying to keep the evening peaceful. "Mom," he said carefully, "this is Maya." Evelyn looked me up and down slowly. Not subtle either, deliberate, like she was inspecting damaged property before purchase. Then came the smile, small, sharp, dangerous. "So," she repeated while sipping wine, "what exactly do you do?" I answered honestly. "I work remotely in property management." Technically true, just incomplete. Evelyn nodded slowly in the same way rich people nod when they've already decided someone beneath them isn't worth further investigation. "How practical," she said. Daniel immediately jumped in, sensing tension already. "Maya's incredibly smart, Mom." But Evelyn barely acknowledged him. Instead, her eyes landed on my dress. Simple black fabric, no visible designer logos, no expensive jewelry, no performance of wealth, and that alone was enough for her to decide exactly who I was. Poor. I noticed it in every tiny reaction afterward. The polite smile whenever restaurant bills arrived, the subtle comments about social circles, the way she constantly discussed wealthy daughters of family friends in front of me like advertisements Daniel should reconsider. At first, I tried hard to win her over. I brought thoughtful gifts, remembered birthdays, listened patiently through endless stories about country clubs and charity galas I had zero interest in attending. Nothing mattered, because Evelyn didn't care about kindness. She cared about status. And in her eyes, I had none. The worst part? Daniel saw it happening, but he never truly stopped it. That hurt more than her insults sometimes. One evening after another uncomfortable family dinner, I finally asked him directly while we drove home, "Why does your mother hate me?" Daniel sighed heavily behind the steering wheel. "She doesn't hate you." I laughed quietly, because people only say that when hatred is obvious. "She thinks I'm not good enough for you," I said. Daniel stayed silent too long. That silence answered everything. He reached for my hand afterward. "She just worries about appearances." Appearances. Funny word. Because appearances were exactly why Evelyn had no idea who I really was. You see, 3 years earlier, my grandfather passed away quietly. No public announcements, no media attention, just a private funeral attended mostly by old money families who valued silence more than publicity. And when he died, he left me everything, including Blackthorn Manor. A historic estate worth more money than Evelyn Crawford could probably imagine. But I never told Daniel's family. Not because I was ashamed. Because I wanted at least one relationship in my life untouched by money. Turns out, some people only know how to see wealth. And eventually, Evelyn Crawford was about to learn the truth in the most humiliating way possible. For almost a year after our engagement, I kept my real financial life completely hidden. Not difficult, honestly. Real wealth rarely looks loud. That's something people like Evelyn never understand. She believed money meant designer labels, luxury cars, and constantly reminding strangers how important you are. But my grandfather came from old money, the kind built quietly over generations. He taught me early that the richest people in a room usually don't need everyone to know it. So while Evelyn judged my simple clothes and remote job, she never once questioned why I never seemed stressed about bills, or why I never asked Daniel for financial help, or why I always stayed strangely calm whenever conversations turned toward money. She only saw what she wanted to see. And Daniel? He noticed less than anyone. Part of me sometimes wondered whether he truly loved me, or just loved how uncomplicated I seemed compared to the wealthy women his mother tried introducing him to constantly. Still, despite everything, I genuinely believed things might improve after the wedding. That hope died 3 weeks before the ceremony. Evelyn invited me to lunch at her country club unexpectedly. The moment her assistant called, I already knew it wasn't about bonding emotionally. Women like Evelyn don't suddenly become kind without strategy attached. The country club looked exactly how I expected. Marble floors, gold-framed artwork, quiet conversations filled with fake laughter and expensive boredom. Evelyn sat near the terrace wearing cream-colored designer clothing that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Maya," she greeted smoothly. "Sit." No warmth, no affection, just control. I sat across from her calmly while waiters poured sparkling water into crystal glasses neither of us touched. For several minutes, she made small talk about wedding arrangements before finally getting to the real reason she invited me. "I think Daniel deserves clarity before marriage," she said casually. There it was. I kept my expression neutral. "About what?" "Financial expectations." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because she said it like a corporate negotiation instead of family conversation. Evelyn folded her hands elegantly. "Daniel comes from a very established family. Certain lifestyles require stability." Translation: "You look poor." I leaned back slightly. "I support myself perfectly fine." "Yes," she replied carefully. "But supporting yourself and maintaining Crawford standards are very different things." There it was openly now, not even hidden beneath politeness anymore. She continued before I could answer. "Marriage becomes complicated when backgrounds don't align." Backgrounds. Interesting word, because if Evelyn knew my actual background, she'd probably choke on her champagne. I studied her quietly for a moment before asking, "Do you think I'm marrying Daniel for money?" Her eyes flickered slightly. Not denial. Confirmation. "I think people become attracted to security," she said diplomatically. That sentence told me everything. No matter how kind I acted, how loyal I was, or how much Daniel loved me, Evelyn had already built a version of me inside her mind. A poor girl climbing upward. Nothing more. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I'd hate to see my son trapped financially supporting someone beneath his future." Beneath. Such a small word. But it carried years of arrogance inside it. And suddenly, I was tired. Tired of shrinking myself to make wealthy people comfortable. Tired of pretending insults didn't hurt. Tired of letting Evelyn treat me like charity standing in her family photographs. I looked directly at her calmly. "You should be careful assuming you know people's financial situations," I said quietly. Evelyn smiled slightly. "Maya, dear, wealthy people recognize each other." That almost made me laugh out loud, because at that exact moment, the woman calling me poor had absolutely no idea she was speaking to the actual owner of the mansion her charity committee rented every winter for fundraising galas. And very soon, she was about to find out publicly. 1 week after that lunch, Evelyn hosted her annual charity gala. The event was famous among the city's wealthy social circles. Politicians, business owners, old money families pretending generosity while competing over status through silent judgment and expensive wine. And every year, the gala took place at Blackthorn Manor, my mansion. Although technically, Evelyn believed the estate belonged to some private heritage trust managed through anonymous ownership. Most people did. My grandfather preferred privacy over publicity, and after inheriting the property, I kept everything exactly the same. No interviews, no magazine features, no public ownership announcements, which meant Evelyn Crawford had spent years renting my home while calling me beneath her sun. The irony alone almost felt too perfect. Daniel adjusted his tie nervously while we arrived at the event together. "Mom's been stressed all week," he admitted quietly. I looked out the car window toward the massive estate gates slowly opening ahead of us. Blackthorn Manor stood illuminated against the night sky, elegant and imposing beneath golden lights. Stone staircases, massive gardens, historic architecture impossible to recreate with modern money. Home. And tonight, for the first time, I wasn't entering as a guest pretending. I was entering fully aware the woman humiliating me had no idea where she truly stood. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Perfectly fine." Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere buzzed with expensive conversations and fake laughter. Women in designer gowns floated across marble floors while wealthy men discussed investments loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. And right in the center of it all stood Evelyn Crawford, performing importance beautifully. The moment she noticed me, her expression tightened almost invisibly before smoothing back into social perfection. "Maya?" she greeted carefully. "You made it." Interesting choice of words. Like attendance itself surprised her. Daniel kissed his mother's cheek quickly before getting pulled into conversation by business associates, leaving Evelyn and me standing near the staircase alone. Her eyes moved across my dress slowly. Tonight, I wore black silk with emerald jewelry from my grandmother's private collection. Elegant, understated, but unmistakably old money to anyone educated enough to recognize it. And Evelyn noticed immediately. I saw the confusion flicker behind her eyes, because for the first time since meeting me, something didn't fit her assumptions anymore. "That necklace is beautiful," she said carefully. "Thank you. It looks vintage." "It is." She studied me another second longer before smiling politely. "Well, enjoy yourself tonight." Then she walked away toward other guests before the conversation could continue. But I noticed something important. For the first time ever, Evelyn looked uncertain around me. Good. Hours passed smoothly after that. I greeted old family acquaintances quietly, avoided unnecessary attention, and listened patiently while wealthy strangers unknowingly complimented my own estate around me. Then came the moment everything changed. Near midnight, the charity committee gathered guests inside the ballroom for the annual donor recognition speech. Evelyn stood proudly near the stage microphone, glowing with social confidence. "This beautiful estate," she announced warmly, "has graciously hosted our foundation for years." Polite applause followed, then she smiled toward the crowd. "And tonight, I'd especially like to thank the anonymous ownership family for continuing their generosity." Right on cue, the estate director entered from the side hallway. Mr. Whitmore, 80 years old, loyal to my grandfather until the day he died, and unfortunately for Evelyn, completely incapable of pretending not to know me. His eyes found mine instantly in the crowd, then his entire face lit up warmly. "Miss Blackwood," he said loudly across the silent ballroom, "you've finally returned home." Everything stopped. Completely. Around the room, confused whispers spread instantly. Evelyn's smile disappeared. And slowly, very slowly, she turned toward me. The silence inside the ballroom became suffocating. Every conversation stopped. Every glass froze midair. And Evelyn Crawford stood near the stage, staring at me like the ground beneath her expensive heels had suddenly disappeared. Mr. Whitmore smiled warmly, completely unaware he had just detonated a social bomb in the middle of her charity gala. "It's wonderful to see you back at Blackthorn Manor, Miss Blackwood," he continued proudly. "Your grandfather would have been very happy tonight." Whispers exploded across the room instantly. "Blackwood? Wait, the Blackwoods? She owns the estate?" I watched realization spread through the ballroom like fire moving across dry paper. Old money guests recognized the name immediately. New money guests recognized the reactions. And Evelyn? Evelyn looked physically frozen. Daniel turned toward me slowly, confusion written all over his face. "Maya?" I held his gaze calmly, because suddenly there was nothing left to hide. Mr. Whitmore approached us fully now, smiling kindly. "I apologize, Miss Blackwood. I didn't realize your ownership was still private." Ownership. The word landed hard. Several charity committee members near the stage exchanged visibly shocked looks. One woman nearly dropped her champagne glass completely. Evelyn finally found her voice. "You own Blackthorn Manor?" she whispered, not angry, not emotional, disoriented. I nodded once. "Yes." Silence again. Heavy silence. Daniel stared at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. "Why didn't you tell me?" A fair question, one I knew would come eventually. "Because I wanted people to know me before they knew my money," I answered quietly. That sentence hit Evelyn harder than anything else could have, because deep down, she instantly understood what it meant. Every insult, every judgment, every conversation where she treated me like someone socially beneath her family happened while standing beneath my roof. The irony was brutal. One of the older guests nearby laughed softly under his breath. Well, this explains a lot. Evelyn's face flushed immediately, not from embarrassment alone, humiliation, public humiliation, the kind wealthy people fear more than almost anything. She straightened her posture quickly, trying desperately to recover social control. Maya, she said carefully, you never mentioned your family background. Interesting. Suddenly I had a family background. I smiled faintly. You never asked. That sentence sliced cleanly through the ballroom tension. Several guests looked away immediately to hide reactions. Daniel stepped closer now, still visibly stunned. You inherited all this? All of it, I answered calmly. His expression shifted slightly then. Not greed exactly, but shock recalculating reality. And suddenly that hurt more than Evelyn's insults ever did. Because for the first time since we met, I couldn't tell whether Daniel was seeing me clearly anymore either. Evelyn attempted another smile, but it looked strained now. Well, this is certainly unexpected. Unexpected. Such a small word for discovering the woman you repeatedly called poor owns property worth more than your entire social reputation combined. Mr. Whitmore looked confused between us all before politely excusing himself, leaving silence hanging heavily again. Then one of Evelyn's wealthy friends approached carefully. Maya Blackwood? She asked with sudden warmth. Your grandfather donated to our arts foundation for years. The difference in her tone was immediate, obvious, disgustingly obvious. And that's when I realized something painful. The room hadn't changed because people suddenly respected me more. They changed because now they knew what I was worth financially, including Evelyn, including Daniel, and deep down, I wasn't sure which realization hurt worse. The rest of the gala felt surreal. People who barely acknowledged me earlier suddenly wanted conversations, introductions, connections, smiles that looked far too practiced to be genuine. It was like watching an entire room rewrite their opinions in real time based on one piece of information: money. Nothing else about me changed. Not my personality, not my kindness, not my values, only their perception of my bank account. And somehow that felt uglier than Evelyn's insults. At least her judgment had been honest. Daniel stayed unusually quiet beside me through most of the evening. Every few minutes, I caught him staring around Blackthorn Manor differently now, as if seeing the estate for the first time through the lens of ownership instead of admiration. That hurt more than I expected. Because suddenly I couldn't stop wondering something dangerous. If I had told him the truth years ago, would he have loved me differently too? Near the end of the gala, Evelyn finally cornered me alone near the library hallway. Gone was the sharp confidence she usually carried around me. Now she looked tense. Careful. Maya, she began softly. I think we may have misunderstood each other over the years. I almost laughed. Misunderstood. Interesting replacement for humiliated repeatedly. I folded my arms calmly. Did we? Evelyn hesitated briefly, then lowered her voice. I never intended to make you feel unwelcome. That lie came so smoothly it almost impressed me. You called me beneath your son's future, I reminded her quietly. Her face tightened instantly. Clearly, she didn't expect me to repeat her exact words back to her. That conversation was taken emotionally, she replied carefully. No apology, just repositioning. Classic Evelyn. I studied her silently for a moment before asking the question sitting heavily inside my chest all night. If I were actually poor, I said quietly, would you still be standing here trying to fix this? Silence. One dangerous second of silence. And that was all the answer I needed. Because people reveal truth fastest when they don't answer immediately. Evelyn looked away briefly before recovering her composure again. I only ever wanted what was best for Daniel. No, I replied calmly. You wanted what looked best. That sentence landed directly where intended. For the first time since meeting her, Evelyn Crawford had absolutely no power in the conversation anymore. And she knew it. Behind us, Soft piano music floated through the ballroom, while wealthy guests continued pretending the evening remained elegant, despite the social disaster still spreading through whispers. Then Evelyn surprised me slightly. "He really does love you," she said quietly. I frowned. Not because I doubted Daniel cared about me, because suddenly I wasn't sure whether love was enough anymore. After tonight, everything felt contaminated by money and status in ways I couldn't ignore. I looked toward the ballroom where Daniel stood speaking with investors now, and for the first time, I noticed how proud he looked introducing himself beside me. Not before. Now. That realization broke something small but important inside me, because I suddenly understood what wealth actually changes. Not your value, people's honesty. I turned back toward Evelyn calmly. "You know the saddest part?" I asked softly. She didn't answer. "I would have shared every part of this life willingly with your family eventually." My voice lowered slightly. "But now I'll never know whether any of you would have loved me without it." Evelyn's expression shifted then. Finally, real regret. Not for insulting me, for being exposed. And somehow, that made everything feel even emptier. The ballroom started emptying slowly as the night ended, but nothing about the atmosphere felt the same anymore. It wasn't just a charity gala now. It was a turning point. A quiet reset of every relationship in the room. People were leaving in smaller groups, whispering about Blackwood inheritance, Blackthorn Manor ownership, and the poor girl who turned out to be the most powerful person in the building. But none of that noise mattered to me anymore, because the only conversations that still felt real were the ones that didn't change after the truth came out. Daniel found me near the grand staircase as I prepared to leave. He didn't look like the same man who walked in tonight. Less confused now. More reflective. "Maya," he said softly. I paused but didn't turn immediately. He stepped closer. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" That question lingered in the air heavily. Not angry, not defensive, genuinely hurt. I finally faced him. "Because I wanted to know who you were without it," I said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he understood, but still struggling with the weight of it. "And now?" he asked. That was the question neither of us wanted to answer too quickly. I looked back toward the ballroom one last time. The estate, the guests, the life I had built quietly in the background while being judged for having none of it. Then I answered honestly. Now I don't know what part of this life was real and what part was reaction to perception. Silence. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I never cared about your money." I looked at him carefully, not accusing, just observing. "You cared about who you thought I was," I said gently. That distinction mattered more than anything else, because he wasn't lying. Not completely, but he also wasn't fully honest with himself. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly, and for the first time all night he looked uncertain about the future. Evelyn approached a few steps behind him, but stopped when she saw us talking. She didn't interrupt. Not anymore. The power in the room had shifted permanently. Not loudly, just irreversibly. Daniel finally spoke again. "What happens now?" I took a slow breath, and realized something unexpected. Revenge had never been my goal. Neither was humiliation. I just wanted to be seen correctly, for once. "I think," I said quietly, "everyone goes home and thinks about what they almost lost because of assumptions." Daniel nodded slowly. Evelyn looked down, unusually silent now. No sharp comment, no correction, just stillness. And that was enough. Because sometimes consequences don't need drama, they just need truth arriving at the wrong time. I walked toward the exit alone, heels echoing softly across marble floors that suddenly felt less like a stage, and more like a mirror. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending to be anything for anyone. Not poor, not rich, not underestimated. Just myself. And as I stepped into the waiting car, I realized something important. The mansion was never the real power. The real power was never needing to prove I belonged there in the first place.